TV Crazy Man here. In this video, I take a look back at the legendary Lone Ranger TV series.
You all alone now. Last man.
Starring Clayton Moore, J. Silverheels, and John Hart. First, we'll look at some funny goofs and amazing trivia facts you might not have known about this classic TV series that made a masked man a legend on television. So hang on tight, it's going to be a fun ride with amazing stars when they were young and connections to other superhero legends you might not have even guessed.
You are Lone Ranger. Hold it.
Yeah, I didn't use any editing tricks. That's the way it really happened.
Hold it.
Believe it or not.
Hold it.
Back in the day, they didn't always use stuntmen. Often they just used dummies to do falls, which were usually pretty noticeable. Like when this bad guy from the movie Lone Ranger in the City of Gold falls suddenly. Of course, at least he didn't scream like a girl before turning into a falling dummy like this guy from episode 2 of The Lone Ranger. It is a little confusing as to why they would dub in a woman screaming for this dude. There's nothing more inspiring or iconic than the Lone Ranger's "Hi-Yo Silver Away," but in this ending scene, the signs are all flipped backwards. Now there's a little controversy over whether or not it's "Hi-Ho" or "Hi-Yo," but from what I read, it's definitely "Hi-Yo." Now see, I had to look it up because when I was a kid, I used to always shout "Hi-Yo Silver Away." Notice all the shadows in the backdrop behind the stagecoach. Kind of looks like the stagecoach was just suddenly walled inside of a room. And you know, the best thing about westerns is seeing the great western landscapes, not all the indoor stuff. Oh look, it's Sergeant Schultz from Hogan's Heroes. I mean, the actor John Banner. Now maybe it's not noticeable to the average viewer, but I've seen Hogan's Heroes enough to know that the guy fighting the Lone Ranger in this scene is definitely not Sergeant Schultz. It's gotta be a stunt double. Now in this scene, Tonto's stunt double gets into a fight with a bad guy, and the fight gets so intense that the whole wall almost caves in. Outdoor shot? Indoor shot. The giveaway is that Tonto just instantly changes directions on his horse.
Look, masked man, give us a break. I'll make it worth your while.
This episode's pretty neat, as we see the Lone Ranger in a suit, which reminds me of his future relative, the Green Hornet. More on him later in the video. My question out of this episode is, though, just how fast can the Lone Ranger change clothes? You know, maybe the Lone Ranger has more in common with Superman than just a love for justice. More on that later as well.
Truth, justice, and the American way.
Now here's another possible example of some kind of superpower. The Lone Ranger has a disguise on, when suddenly he takes off the unusually large hat and runs off to jump on Silver, but then where was he keeping his regular hat? Did he speed away and grab it somewhere?
Plenty strange.
Not so strange, Tonto. Yeah. The nearest town is Pine Gap. There's a jeweler there.
Yeah, it's pretty small, but you can definitely see a car way out in the distance. This next one I think was created in the download process. I saw it on the Lone Ranger channel on YouTube, which by the way, you can watch all the episodes of the Lone Ranger on. This could be a digital goof, or this could be something really spooky, but it's cool. I'm just not sure. You ever notice how sometimes when they switch from an outdoor to a studio shot that the background just seems to turn into nothing but plain sky? I bet you don't know what Kemosabe actually means. Maybe we should just ask the guy who's used the word more than any other man in the history of the universe.
What does Kemosabe mean? Oh, excuse me.
Why, you Kemosabe.
And why did he finally leave?
And find out what Kemosabe
Well, that would do it, yes.
Kemosabe? That sounds familiar.
That's right, Kemosabe. You trusty scout.
The one thing that other versions of the Lone Ranger seem to have forgotten is that John Reed, the Lone Ranger, had previously saved Tonto when they were teens. And Tonto sealed their friendship with the name Kemosabe and a ring that was also a symbol of their friendship. Yeah, Tonto would have never done that. In the 1981 Legend of the Lone Ranger movie, John Reed's parents were killed, and he lived with Tonto's tribe for a bit, and even became Tonto's blood brother.
You will always be Kemosabe, trusted friend.
It means trusty scout. Me never forget you.
Now everybody knows the Lone Ranger gets his silver bullets from his mine, but do you know where the mine was and what the bullets represented?
The Lone Ranger, Jim, and Tonto approached the site of the secret silver mine.
It must have been 10 years ago that my brother, old Jim here, and I discovered the mine and built this shack. It's under the bunk. There.
Yep, one of the richest veins of silver ever found in these here parts.
I want some of the ore cast into silver bullets. Silver bullets will serve as sort of a symbol. A symbol which means justice by law. But I live and fight only to see the eventual defeat and the proper punishment by law of every criminal in the West.
The Lone Ranger was an expert marksman who swore never to kill.
You forget I told you I vowed never to shoot to kill.
The Ranger got Silver, his horse, by saving him from a wild buffalo.
Silver white.
Silver. That would be a name for him.
In 2003, a failed TV pilot of the Lone Ranger made Silver out to be some sort of spirit guide, an idea they carried over to the Disney movie in 2013. I kind of think they should probably just let him be a horse, a really smart horse.
No!
The Lone Ranger's true superpower, and one that puts him up there with the likes of Superman in my book, is his unwavering moral code and dedication to justice.
I happen to believe that when a man's in the right, he has no reason to be afraid.
The masked man is the brother to every law-abiding man, whatever his race or color.
These traits were summed up in the Lone Ranger's Creed, created by the men who brought life to the Lone Ranger, George W. Trindle and Fran Stryker, through a radio show in 1933. The creed was repeated many times by Clayton Moore in public appearances. It states,
I believe to have a friend, a man must be one.
We'll ride together.
That all men are created equal, and everyone has the right and the power within themselves to help make this a greater world. I believe that God put the firewood on earth, but every man must gather and light it himself.
Every man needs a faith and a symbol to live by.
We must make the best of what equipment that we have. And I believe in being prepared physically, mentally, and morally to fight when necessary for that which is right. I believe that sooner or later, somewhere, somehow, we must settle with this earth and make payment for what we have taken. That this country of the people and by the people and for the people shall live forever. And everything changes, but the truth alone lives on forever. I believe in my Creator.
Build church no matter who try to stop him. I like his spirit. He sounds like a man who will fight evil no matter how great the odds.
My country. My fellow man.
Did you know there were two Lone Rangers on the original TV series run? John Hart, who had appeared on a couple episodes of The Lone Ranger as a guard and a henchman before playing the Lone Ranger for all of Season 3. By Season 4, Clayton Moore was back. Now, I've heard it said that Moore didn't know why he was fired, and the other speculation that it was over money or a contract dispute. I'm sure everyone has heard the song You Don't Mess Around with Jim that contains the immortal words, you don't tug on Superman's cape or pull the mask off the old Lone Ranger. But there's a lot of other interesting connections to Superman that are pretty cool. On the episode, The Beeler Gang, two Superman actors played in the same scene as husband and wife. Robert Rockwell would go on to play Superman's father Jor-El on the first episode of The Adventures of Superman, and Beverly Garland would go on to play the mother of Lois Lane decades later on Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, for 6 episodes.
Surprise?
Stunned.
Speaking of Lois Lane, The Adventures of Superman Lois Lane actress Noelle Neal guest starred on the episode Letter of the Law, and Phyllis Coates, who played as Lois Lane on the adventures of Superman's first season, was on 3 different episodes of The Lone Ranger.
It was destroyed by water.
That's where you're wrong again, Miss Prince.
What do you mean?
Dabbs Greer, who was on the very first episode of Superman, appears in 1 Lone Ranger episode, as does Leave It to Beaver star Hugh Beaumont, that plays in a very memorable episode of Superman and the Lone Ranger.
I don't judge men by what's on their faces. I judge them by what's in their hearts. And I see nothing bad in yours.
Future Dukes of Hazzard stars Denver Powell and James Best both made guest appearances, with Powell appearing in several episodes. I'm sure Dukes and Smallville star John Schneider would have liked to have starred on the Lone Ranger as well, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't born yet. And Tom Wopat had just been born during the Lone Ranger's run on television. Here's a fun fact. Denver Powell played Johnny Crawford's TV dad before Chuck Connors did on The Rifleman, on an episode of The Lone Ranger. Of course, James Best and Denver Powell played on the Andy Griffith Show as well, so it's no surprise that Aunt Bee would show up on The Lone Ranger as a bad guy, no less. And mean old Ben Weaver actor Will Wright also made it to The Lone Ranger.
Next time you take easy, John. Fight man. You fight woman.
Real-life brothers Dwayne and Daryl Hickman from the Dobie Gillis Show appear a couple of times apiece, and once on the same episode as the same character at different ages.
I resign anyway. You young pup, you're fired.
Before he was Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke, James Arnez was only a deputy sheriff on the episode of The Lone Ranger entitled A Matter of Courage.
Hey, I better ask for my badge back. I'm gonna need a job.
The Lone Ranger was the star of 2 cartoon series, one in 1966 and one in 1980. The 66 version was more like the series Wild Wild West, incorporating elements of sci-fi, while the 1980 version was a more standardized Western version.
I'm known as the Lone Ranger.
The 1980 version was voiced by William Conrad, who had voiced Matt Dillon years before on a Gunsmoke radio show.
How's he going to keep the doc away such a long time? Not even getting suspicious.
Here's another tie-in to Gunsmoke. Dennis Weaver made an appearance on The Lone Ranger before he was Chester on Gunsmoke. Did you know the Lone Ranger Clayton Moore teamed up with everyone's favorite superdog on a 1959 episode of Lassie, entitled Peace Patrol?
Good girl, Lassie.
John Hart made a couple appearances on television in the 80s as the Lone Ranger.
Like it or not, our society needs its heroes.
Are you the one they call the Fonz?
You know, it probably wasn't too hard to get the Lone Ranger on Happy Days, as Mrs. C, Marion Ross, had been on the Lone Ranger years before on an episode.
I'm afraid he's left. But I didn't get a chance to thank him.
In the late 70s, Clayton Moore was sued by the producers of the Legend of the Lone Ranger movie, preventing him from wearing the mask for a time. In my opinion, that was the primary reason no one went to see an otherwise decent movie. Sure, it didn't help the main star had to have all these parts redubbed by another actor, but the dirty way they did Moore was most likely the biggest reason. You know, I think a smart plan to bring the Ranger to modern audiences would be to make a movie true to the character of the Lone Ranger, with bigger action and adventure, of course, keep the budget under control, and they wouldn't have to make as much as they needed in 2013 to be profitable. Just my opinion.
Hey, wait a minute. Haven't you ever heard of the Lone Ranger?
The Lone Ranger?
Sure fine fellow, mask and all. I wonder who he is.
Well, Tonto's horse is gone. Who's Tonto?
In no time at all, you'll be the most successful.
Iris, I'm a doctor, not a politician.
Probably the most likable and down-to-earth member of the Star Trek cast, despite having flown all over the galaxy, was Deforest Kelley. He was an extremely low-key and private individual who preferred not to seek leading roles and not to be involved in the Hollywood lifestyle.
What is that, Doctor? I like them better than I like you.
In real life, as a teen, he sang at the Baptist church where his father was a minister.
You're an actor, not a singer.
At one early point in his life, he actually wanted to become a doctor, but they didn't have the money to send him to medical school.
What am I, a doctor or a moon shuttle conductor?
I'm a doctor, not an engineer.
No, you're an engineer. Look, I'm a doctor, not an escalator. Spock, give me a hand.
Not a magician, Spock. Just an old country doctor.
I'm a doctor, not a coal miner.
No, I'm a doctor, not a mechanic.
You're a doctor.
Not a doctor. A condemned murderer.
Kelley preferred westerns to sci-fi, believe it or not. He was on The Lone Ranger 3 times as 3 different characters. Once as a doctor, of course.
I'm glad you're here. Are you the doctor? Yes, I am.
Kelley portrayed 2 different men in the legendary 1881 OK Corral gunfight between the Earps and the Clantons. In '55, he played Ike Clanton in an episode of the series You Are There in 1955. And in '57, he played Morgan Earp in the movie Gunfight at the OK Corral. On Star Trek, he found himself at the OK Corral again. This was in the 3rd season episode Spectra of the Gun.
We're talking like we really are in Tombstone, Arizona in 1881.
Precisely. I'll tell you one thing. You better be ready to make a fight of it today.
Next, we look at the Green Hornet, his TV series, and his relation to the Lone Ranger. The following portion of this video is from my previous Green Hornet video that I uploaded a while back. Just a few quick character facts in history in case you weren't familiar with the Green Hornet's origins. The Green Hornet was created in 1936 by George W. Trindle and Fran Stryker. His secret identity is that of Britt Reed, who is the publisher of the Daily Sentinel newspaper. The twist is that the Green Hornet is considered a criminal to the world at large, so that he can infiltrate the underworld. His partner is, of course, Kato, who drives the Hornet's car, Black Beauty. In the original radio version of the Green Hornet, Britt Reed is the son of Dan Reed Jr., the nephew of the Lone Ranger. Dan Reed, according to the original story, had actually rode with the Lone Ranger. During the Lone Ranger TV series around 1955, the character Dan Reed Jr. actually replaced Tonto for a few episodes, as Jay Silverheels was recuperating from a heart attack. Dan was played by stuntman Chuck Courtney.
Dan, freedom of the press carries a great amount of responsibility. Good reporting covers both sides of a story.
Since the Hornet's creation in the early 30s, he's had multiple comic series, the TV series of course, 2 movie serials, and a motion picture. In the episode, The Frog is a Deadly Weapon, Britt Reed gives a possible reason for having gotten into crime fighting.
That Glenn Connors may still be alive. He was one of the men who framed my father.
In the episode, Eat, Drink, and Be Dead, I read that this helicopter was actually used in the 1966 Batman movie. Of course, in the close-ups you can tell that the men aboard the helicopter are in a studio. In the episode, May the Best Man Lose, a white vehicle is parked right beside Scanlon's car. After a bomb goes off in his car, the white vehicle appears to have just completely disappeared. In the episode Corpse of the Year, Part 1, the Green Hornet appears to be hanging out in Mayberry. In the background you can see Floyd's barbershop and the courthouse where Andy Taylor works.
Looking for me?
Later in that episode, Kato and the Green Hornet chase a phony Green Hornet all through the streets of Mayberry. Mayberry, as I've said in other videos, showed up on Superman, Batman, and even Star Trek in the 60s. The goof comes while Kato is driving through Mayberry, the entire time we see what looks like a busy big city night scene in Black Beauty's back window. Well, if it's not a big city, it's definitely not Mayberry. In the conclusion of that story, in Corpse of the Year Part 2, fake evil Green Hornet and a fake Black Beauty tries to run over the real Kato and Hornet and drives off a cliff. But for some reason that I can't figure out, the car explodes before it even hits the bottom and doesn't even look like the same model of car.
I never realized how much trouble one little bullet could cause so much trouble.
In the episode Bad Bed on a 459 Silent, a blooper was actually created by a bad edit of 2 different readings of Van Williams' line.
I never realized how much trouble one little bullet could cause so much trouble. You try me, Clark. Just try me.
Also in that episode, the Green Hornet is pointing his gloved finger at the dirty cops, but the next second, the glove is gone. Also in that episode, it looks like the cop is landing on a stuntman's mattress, conveniently placed in the warehouse.
Aren't you jumping to conclusions?
But that's not all. Now notice where the two guys are fighting at. So just where in the world are those hands coming from?
Aren't you jumping to conclusions?
The next goof comes from the episode Alias to Scarf, which guest starred the Dracula actor and horror legend, John Carradine.
No.
It's true, I did find a goof in that episode.
Since you doubt the supernatural, let us say that you were mistaken.
Notice the Green Hornet and Kato wax replicas. Carradine, playing the villain of course, threatens this lady. Then suddenly the wax statues of the Green Hornet and Kato come to life and subdue the villain. But are we to believe that these statues were the Green Hornet and Kato all along?
I shudder, but I fear we shall have to accept what people have seen.
In the episode Hornet Save Thyself, a sign has a grammatical error that totally makes its meaning unclear. The word to should have two O's, because now it sounds like they're saying that they won't work for people that are large. Hey, I'm not judging. I make spelling errors all the time. You might even find one on this video.
Nobody wants closing.
The actor Mako guest starred as a bad guy in the episode Praying Mantis. He had a lot of ties to superhero properties in his lifetime. He was the voice of Splinter in the animated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film released in 2007, Highlander, RoboCop 3, Conan the Destroyer, The A-Team, Wonder Woman TV series, and the one that sticks out in my mind the most are the two episodes of The Incredible Hulk, where he played Lee Sung, a martial arts expert that tried to help David Banner. He was also in a hilarious episode of F Troop as a samurai warrior.
That's what I call a chop.
Of course, in this particular episode of The Green Hornet, he was no match for Bruce Lee. Years before James Best was chasing the Duke boys across Hazard County, he was living a life of crime. That is, until he came up against Green Hornet and Kato in the episode Deadline for Death. In the episode Ace in the Hole, Richard Anderson guest stars as a villain a few years before he was Oscar on The $6 Million Man. That particular episode contains this interesting scene.
That's very funny.
Yeah, that was one of the strange things about Green Hornet and Batman. They never could make up their minds as to whether or not Batman and the Green Hornet were TV characters in each other's world or whether or not they actually existed. Everyone knows about the famous team-up between the crime fighters on the episodes A Piece of the Action and the second part, Batman's Satisfaction. But did you know that Batman was shown to have existed on the Green Hornet series, has a TV show on the episode The Secret of the Sally Bell in December of '66, before the famous team-up. A few weeks before that, in November '66, the Green Hornet was mentioned by Bruce Wayne as a TV series he wanted to watch, on the episode The Impractical Joker.
It's about time for the Green Hornet.
You're right, Bruce.
And before those strange TV series mentions, the Green Hornet and Kato made a cameo in the Batman episode The Spell of Tut in September of '66, where it seemed that both sets of crime fighters were aware of each other's existence.
Aren't you in the wrong city?
On special assignment for the Daily Sentinel. You know my aide, Kato?
Robin, the boy wonder.
Now in March of '67, when Batman and Green Hornet team up for a full two-parter on the episodes A Piece of the Action and Batman's Satisfaction, and Batman and Robin act as if they don't know that the Green Hornet and Kato are good guys.
The Green Hornet is in our fair city for a piece of the action.
Not a mention of having heard of each other's TV series either. It's like wholly confusing continuity, Batman. Or is it continuity? I'm never sure about these things. Batman doesn't even start to realize the Green Hornet and Kato might be good guys until the very end.
Maybe he meant to uncover the entire ring, who knows?
The Green Hornet, a crime fighter?
Okay, so maybe this team up happened out of order, but how do you explain how Batman is just a TV series on the Green Hornet, and the Green Hornet is just a TV series on Batman? Well, I guess it's not above the realm of possibility that Hollywood would create their own fictionalized accounts of the Green Hornet and Batman within the Batman universe that didn't resemble the shows as we know them.
Wholly unlikely, but...
Or It was all just a giant goof, done for laughs, and I shouldn't be taking any of this so seriously before my head explodes.
Have you short-circuited Batman's brain?
Also, in the episode A Piece of the Action, Batman is supposedly stuck on a giant glue pad, but it's only his cape that is actually against a giant glue pad. How is his arm stuck to the cape? All he had to do is walk forward and take his cape off. You know, it occurs to me that the team-up of the Green Hornet and Batman was likely the first live-action superhero team-up ever. I can't think of any others that might have happened apart from cartoons and comic books. Let me know if I'm right or wrong in the comments below. Here's some quick Bruce Lee trivia for you. I just read this one recently. It's been reported that Bruce Lee actually had terrible eyesight and even wore contacts.
Oh, don't keep that.
Bruce Lee had a lot of famous students, including Steve McQueen, James Coburn, James Garner, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Steve McQueen and James Coburn were pallbearers at Lee's funeral. A lot of people have speculated over the years that Lee's death may have had something to do with painkillers, maybe even aspirin he took due to a lower back injury. But lately I've heard another theory that said that he had his sweat glands surgically removed from his armpits, and that it may have contributed to his untimely death by heat exhaustion. Of course, Lee created Jeet Kune Do, his own martial art, after the Green Hornet was canceled. He believed in weight training, but he focused his workouts and his diet as to not become bulky, as he feared it might hinder his lightning fast speed. Now, Lee is considered to be the most influential martial artist of all time. His reported level of strength and punching power greatly surpassed his physical size. I've always been fascinated by tales of Bruce Lee's abilities. Of course, with the internet and everything, it's hard to tell what is true and what is not. For sure, Bruce Lee is now as much a legend as he is a fascinating figure in entertainment history. He's inspired millions over the years since his death, both in fitness and in martial arts. Check out the TV Crazy Man YouTube channel for lots of classic TV fun facts, goofs, bloopers, and more. And please don't forget to subscribe and comment in the comments below. Cartoon fans, don't forget to check out my Frady Cat Cartoons channel for lots of funny stuff. My teachers told me I never amount to much. Since I procrastinate so much, I told them, just you wait. Then what happened? Well, thanks for watching the TV Crazy Man channel, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit the like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think, and y'all have a great day.
Adios, Kemosabe.
Who is he anyway?
He's the Lone Ranger.
He's the Lone Ranger.
Alan, he's the Lone Ranger.